I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here in the Hub Pavilion in Davos. Delighted to be joined by Michael Porter, professor at Harvard Business School. Thanks so much for coming along.
Thanks, Edie.
So we've got your new report out, Prosperity at Risk, and you've done a survey of 10,000 Harvard Business School alumni about competitiveness. Tell me a little bit about what you found out.
Well, Edie, this is a very unusual moment because I think the U.S. is facing a very serious challenge to its competitiveness, probably for the first time since the mid-'80s, when Japan rose and became a global power. And we did this survey because we are very concerned about what the problem is and what needs to be done.
And tell me what you think the problem is.
Well, there's a lot of core strengths in the U.S., areas like entrepreneurship and innovation. We still are really the innovation capital of the world, but those strengths have been increasingly nullified by a series of policies or non-policies that have added a significant cost of doing business in the U.S. Things like regulatory cost, relatively high tax rates, a lot of complexity and confusion around labor and a variety of other areas. At the same time, other countries have been moving up and improving and cleaning up their bureaucracies and improving their skills. So what we're finding is the U.S. is losing the lion's share of location decisions where people have a choice of the U.S. versus someplace else. They're often going someplace else.
I had a really interesting conversation with a partner from Excel Partners, venture capitalist, Joe Schorndorf, sat in your chair, and he told me that his companies cannot get enough engineers. There would be full employment in Silicon Valley if they could bring those engineers in from India. They can't, or wherever they are. They just cannot get them in fast enough. Yeah,
what we found in our survey, and it's verified by the data, is U.S. used to be a skill center. It used to be a strength. Now it's rapidly becoming a weakness. One of the major reasons why companies are relocating is they just can't find the appropriate skills, or they can't find them at a reasonable cost. For a country to be competitive, you've got to have companies' ability to compete internationally, but you've got to do that in a way that allows the standard of living for citizens to also improve. And you've got to do those two things at once. And the problem facing the U.S. is we don't have the right conditions to be productive enough to allow our companies to compete while also providing good wages and adding jobs. And we're in this very difficult situation. And it's really a global problem because if the U.S. doesn't do well, it has ripple effects throughout the world economy.
And I know that you're not just focused on the problems, but on the solutions. And tell me some of what you found from businesses. What are they proposing?
Well, I think businesses are starting to understand that they have a bigger role in this issue, that part of the reason that the U.S. has not done as well is companies have been sort of taking the obvious step of moving offshore whenever they saw lower wages elsewhere and haven't done enough to really reinvest in the U.S., improve the skills of their own workforce, take a role in that, raise their level of technology. And so we found a lot of companies now starting to understand that they could do something about skills, they could do something about training, they could do something about improving their supplier bases here in the U.S., they could collaborate with other businesses to tackle some of the challenges that have been affecting our competitiveness in this country. And I think there's a real inflection point now in the attitudes and thinking of the business community. It's not just it's them in Washington, let's move. It's all of us. And we need to start taking some responsibility.
Can you give me an example of something that you've seen that's really surprised you or kind of fascinated you about a business doing something like this?
Well, we in some of the other work that's done in this project, we actually looked at Corning. I don't know if you know Corning. Corning is a company up in upstate New York, and Corning has been a company that's actually turned this little sleepy town of Corning, New York, in the middle of nowhere, into really a high-tech center by really reinvesting in the community, making sure that there was a very strong pipeline of engineers and scientists coming out of the higher education system in that region. I think the Corning case shows that you can be high-tech and efficient in America, even in rural America, if the company's attitude is to be committed to its community. But see, we've been through this era of globalization when the whole focus was moving things out, building a global supply chain, and in that process, companies often lost the connection with their communities. And they didn't think those communities were important anymore. And if something wasn't right, well, move somewhere cheaper. I think now the kind of folly of that thinking is starting to emerge. And so our job at Harvard Business School is to see if we can't mobilize our alumni and our constituencies really to rethink some of these questions about where to locate and how to think about America as a business location. And we're encouraged with the response so far.
Thank you so much for coming in to speak to us, Michael Porter. Thanks very much for coming to the Hub Pavilion in Davos. And I'm Edie Lush.